So we start with a poll this morning. Quick show of hands from the community. Who here has as their favorite part of church service the passing of the peace? So for some of you, it is your favorite part. And who here would say that it is one of their top 2 or 3 things to do on a Sunday morning in church service? Quite a few of you. And is there anyone that would like to proclaim it, shout it from the rooftops, that this is not at all your favorite thing? In fact, it is close to the very bottom of your list of favorite things to do in a church service on a Sunday morning. There are, yes, okay. There are a few hands that went up there. And I wonder if we had an anonymous survey, if the answers would change at all. So we're a mixed bag, clearly. Would you be surprised then to know that the passing of the peace has been subject to much debate in our worship committee meetings? Many of you clearly enjoy this practice a great deal. On Easter Sunday, because I knew that many of our regular members would be out of town and many guests would be here, I asked Eric to try and keep things moving. Play him quickly after we had begun the passing of the peace. I even gave a verbal cue that you should just greet the people next to you or near you and move on quickly. And Eric played the song all the way through, and 2.5 verses in, some of you were still on the other side of the sanctuary. Last Sunday I was worshiping at Middle Collegiate Church in the city as a part of a conference that I was attending. In the bulletin at Middle, during the passing of the peace, people are encouraged, if they want to or need to go take a bio break. If you don't want to participate, one option is to just walk out of the sanctuary and go to the bathroom. It wasn't an order, I don't want to say that, it was a suggestion. So the passing of the peace began, and I stood in place in my pew, and I stood, and I stood, and I stood, and I stood, and greeted people near me, and lots of people approached me, and after about the 20th handshake, I began to feel less and less kind of in the moment. What is this for again? Why are we doing this? Why is this lasting so long? And I stood, and I started to feel a little jaded about the whole process. And I also then noticed that as I looked around, everyone else who was a member of the church seemed to be having a really good time. That is instructive in and of itself, right? That people who have been around a community for a long time are gathering with friends and having a good time, and newcomers are really not sure what's going on some of the time. But there were lots of hugs and smiles, and there was plenty of warmth, and I thought, how lovely for them. But part of that congregation's story is that a generation ago, it was slated for closure. At the same time, the AIDS crisis was beginning to develop, and the church was, at that time, one of the few willing to do memorials for people who had died from AIDS. That piqued the interest of a number of gay community members, and so their church community began to change as a result. The passing of the peace, then, for them is more than saying hello, and clearly is not something that those folks are willing to let go of. Middle Church's sanctuary. It has been sanctuary, a place apart from the world, where some have found welcome and acceptance they didn't or don't always find outside. And so for me, I may say, how lovely, and also feel like it wasn't for me, but it also didn't need to be about me. There's always another side to this, of course. As I was preparing for today, I was looking around at some resources on this topic of the passing of the peace, and I saw a video clip of a congregational consultant who went to a congregation that in the middle of the service, the pastor said, "All right now, we're going to love up on each other for the next 15 minutes or so. We'll see you when we're done." Now, this is a congregational consultant. This man's job is to go and visit other churches for a living. And he said that he heard this from the pulpit, love up on each other, wondered what that meant. And he stood there thinking, 15 minutes, love up on each other, I gotta go. So It is possible to make the most outgoing, open-minded person uncomfortable. It's possible to be hospitable and inhospitable at the same time. It's not possible to make everyone comfortable. Some people need to be touched, and some people really need to not be touched. Some people need to be greeted, and others really need to not be greeted. Some people, like me, prefer more than anything else the eye contact from another person, to actually be seen by somebody. Some people need to talk. Others want to be quiet. So why is this practice important? Why do we bother? Should we continue, given the diversity of practice and opinion on the topic? So indulge me just for a moment, because I'm almost at the end of my first sermon, and there's two you'll have noticed in the bulletin today. The passing of the peace has three, as far as I can tell, three primary concerns. The Didache, which was a first century writing that is one of the earliest documents that instructs us on the earliest practices of the first Christians, instructed Christians to pass the peace as an act of reconciliation. So point one, reconciliation, echoing the words of Jesus, to reconcile with one another before approaching the altar for communion. It was a way of getting your head and your heart straightened out, removing obstacles before partaking of the bread and cup, and to make reconciliation a regular part of the faith. Secondly, passing of the peace was to symbolize peacemaking, echoing Jesus' words that peacemakers are the blessed ones. We are reminded again and again in this world how difficult the call to be a peacemaker can be and how important that call really is. I am purposefully not dwelling too long on the news of the day, on the missile attacks in Syria this Sunday, following the repeated chemical gas attacks on Syrian civilians. That situation is so complex and long-standing that one can't be understood with a drop-in line or two during a sermon. But it is worth holding up our call to be peacemakers alongside the fact that Courtney Madsen was here last week, Courtney being the regional director for refugee resettlement in New Jersey, to advocate on behalf of refugees and asylees. And note that among all of the staggering statistics about the decline of refugees coming to our shores, when there are millions of refugees, bona fide refugees, present in the world, that as we fire missiles at Syria, we have accepted 11 Syrian refugees into our country this year. 11. 11. Jesus says in Matthew 5, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God." Point three, related to the passing of the peace. It is to symbolize that we are an Easter people. After the resurrection, Jesus came to you among others and said, "Peace be with you." We are to be an Easter people full of strange and ironic and absurd joy. How absurd? Jesus shows up among a group of people absolutely terrified and says, "Peace be with you," like nothing even happened. Now, what does he say after that? "Give me some fish." Weird, right? I mean, really strange story, right? But how awesome of a story is that? Resurrected, now give me some fish. Additionally, we don't get to keep this Easter joy as a personal gift or own it as private property. Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women who told this news to the apostles in the verses preceding these verses that we heard today in Luke. So in passing the peace, we symbolize this joy as a communal property rather than an individual one, which is again different than how our culture interprets joy much of the time. So that's sermon one. Sermon two is something else. And it's about doubt. We proclaim faith. We proclaim Easter joy. We proclaim good news. And when I say we, I mean Pastor Lindsay, myself, but all of us in our own way. We proclaim faith. We proclaim Easter joy. We proclaim good news. By living our lives, by tending to the things that we ought to tend to, by living the virtues. I'm sometimes confronted with the idea that I have to be sure about my faith because it's part of my job. It's part of the call. If I'm not sure, Where does that leave you? Now, I think that's a false dichotomy, right? After all, you, I assume, don't actually believe simply because I believe, or Pastor Lindsay believes. And everyone has some doubts about some things, of course. Nobody, despite what they say, has ever done a perfect job of proving or disproving the existence of God. There are many people who are kind of talking heads in our society who have seemingly proved or disproved something theological, but we all might have our opinions on the topic, but there's no way to actually concretely prove that God exists or does not exist, to really genuinely prove it. And so instead, we're often left to subjective views. You see a sunset, and you might say, look at the magnificence of the creation of God, and someone else might say, look at the magnificence of the laws of physics that mean that there are more molecules late in the day for the light to pass through that scatter the blue and violet light away from view, leaving us with these gorgeous reds, pinks, and oranges. I might thank God for a new child. Someone else might thank the brilliance of genetics and biology, and plenteous would say, all of the above. But I want to simply say this morning that I doubt, that I have serious doubts. Does that do anybody any good? Only if it leads to better questions about our doubts and our faith. One of the critical ways in which I come to doubt is because of the worst stuff in the world. Some of the worst stuff that happens, and some of the worst stuff that people do to each other. Syria, for example. This week was Yom HaShoah. It's the day of Holocaust remembrance, and a small group of us were at Ner Tamid on Broad Street on Wednesday night for this Yom HaShoah service, the community Yom HaShoah service, to hear the story of a man named Joseph Ungerleider. It's his story, and I'm not going to tell it. He stood for 30 minutes at the lectern and told his story. He is 91 years of age, and he told his story about being a labor camp survivor and of losing his own mother and siblings at Auschwitz, of his being rounded up, escaping, being rounded up again, being liberated by the Soviets, of having moved to Australia before coming to the United States. And while he was in Australia, 5 years after the war ended, he thought, as he was going down some stairs, that passing by him the other way on the staircase was his mother. And calling out to his mother and realizing, after considerable pleading with this woman, that it wasn't her after all. He said he had no ashes to sprinkle, no body to bury, no coffin to view, no finality. I always think that folks like Joseph would have such enormous doubts about God. But he also spoke on Wednesday night of the balance between the horrors of this world and also a sense of blessing. He married another Holocaust survivor. Together, they had 2 daughters. Between those 2 daughters, they have 5 grandchildren. They have a clear capacity for understanding true beauty in life, made clear by the awfulness of what happened in the labor camps and death camps in Europe in the 1940s. His wife, another survivor, they've been married 60 years. At the end of the service on Wednesday night, Rabbi Stephen Kushner reminded us of the inscription on a wall in a cellar in Cologne, likely inscribed by someone who was hiding from the Nazis at the time. There's every chance that this person who wrote this was later found by the Nazis. On that cellar wall in Cologne, it says, "I believe in the sun even when it's not shining. I believe in love even when feeling it not. I believe in God even when he is silent." Sometimes I think that I have many of the answers. Sometimes my doubts are just that, they're my own. And it's worth hearing from people like Joseph to hear what he has to say about blessing. And being open to the possibility that he has a theological understanding that might inform my own. Study as I might, Press as I might, wrestle as I might, I do not have all the answers, and thank God for that. Can I believe in God even when God appears silent to me? The passing of the peace confronts me in the midst of bouts of doubt about faith and also some serious doubts about humanity and the horrors humans can inflict. The passing of the peace is an opportunity to refute those doubts, and it is also an opportunity to extend those doubts. It is possible to make things worse here in our church. We extend doubts about God and about human beings by not greeting others as they wish to be greeted, by not touching as they wish to be touched. We have to be conscious of our bodies and how we are interpreting others. Some people just don't want to be stood right next to. Some, even those who have no issue with touch, don't want to shake hands with 20 people, especially if they're holding a child who is less than a year old, right? Some of us don't have the immune systems we used to have. Pastor Lindsay has gone to great lengths to try and instill a measure of consent into the passing of the peace. Perhaps that's where we have erred. We've tried to offer some direction and guidance for this one practice, the passing of the peace, when in fact this one practice is symbolic of all of our lives. It's a window into how we view our own power, whether we get to ignore what others are trying to tell us. And we do that when we grab them, when we touch them, when we get closer than they want to, because whatever, it's me and I'm wonderful and I can do what I want, touch what I want, when I want. It doesn't matter because it's me, it's wonderful me, and I'm here. And are we a place of love? Or we can actively listen to people as we seek to embody those things that the passing of the peace was always meant to embody: reconciliation, peacemaking, and Easter joy. Because the other side of this is that we are a people who are called to take this practice out into the world. And so let's practice the practice here by greeting one another this morning with Easter joy. I'd like you to stand, if you can, and stay where you are, and turn to the person in front, to the side, and behind. Extending the peace. I've got another minute or so, I just want to warn you. Extending the peace of Christ only if you want to, and only if your neighbor wants to. Touching only if both of you want to, in order to bless them and yourself.
How do you know that?
Shake, I'm not done. Shake hands, put your hand over your heart, share your power, and you share your power by asking the other what they would like to do, and if they are sat down, staring straight ahead, not making eye contact with you, you're getting some cues and some clues, right? Share your power with your neighbor, respect them, treat them with humility and kindness and goodness, treat them as a person full of joy and doubts, treat them as if they had gone to hell and back this week, but treat them as ones who deserve your complete and utter respect, and take that to the world. Take that message of a large banquet table where everyone deserves to be seen or not seen, touched or not touched, as they want to be seen and as they want to be touched. May the peace of Christ be with you.